In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, July 12th, here in South Korea. President Yoon-Kishida and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg adopted individually tailored partnership program for constructive collaboration in 11 areas, up from the previous 7 to include broader security interests and anti-terrorism. And earlier on this Wednesday morning, North Korea fires a long-range missile off its east coast barely a month after its last launch and following recent allegations of American spy planes violating the airspace over its exclusive economic zone. Meanwhile, South Korea sees further expansion in employment in June on year, albeit at a slightly lower pace than May, prompting a fresh pledge by the government to address broader discrepancies in the local labour market. We start with news of a fresh display of defiance by North Korea following early allegations this week of American intrusion into the airspace above its exclusive economic zone. For details on this, I have our Choi Min-jung standing by live on the line. So Min-jung, there's been another missile launch, I understand. What do we know thus far?
Sunny, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff announced that North Korea fired what is presumed to be a long-range ballistic missile toward the East Sea at around 10 a.m. Wednesday. The missile was reportedly launched from the Pyongyang region and marks the North's first ballistic missile launch in 27 days. The JCS added the missile was launched at a high angle and flew about 1,000 kilometers before landing in the East Sea. Following the launch, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who's in Lithuania to attend the NATO summit, called an emergency meeting of the National Security Council via video call. Yoon made clear that North Korea's illegal activities come at a price and called for stronger extended deterrence capabilities through the nuclear consultative group between Seoul and Washington. South Korea's military said it is maintaining a full defense posture in close cooperation with the U.S. as well, and it also strongly condemned the North's provocation, saying that it harms peace and stability on the Korean peninsula as well as internationally and comes in clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions.
Now, Min-jung, as I mentioned earlier, this latest launch follows heated accusations by Pyongyang of American airspace intrusion. Do tell us more.
Right, Sunny. The launch comes a day after North Korea threatened to take military action after the regime accused the U.S. of, quote, illegally intruding into the sky above its economic exclusive zone with a spy plane. Kim Yo-jong, the sister of the North Korean leader, had warned the U.S. that it will face a very critical flight if it continues to violate the North's airspace. Both Seoul and Washington, however, have denied the accusation, and they stress that the flights around the Korean peninsula are routine and that they adhere to international law. This is all I have for now, but I'll be back with more on our next newscast. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Min-jung, thank you for that coverage. Now, just a day before North Korea's latest launch, NATO leaders in Lithuania had condemned the country's hostile weapons ambitions while promoting their partnership with South Korea to include broader security concerns. My colleague Oh Soo-young, who is part of the traveling presidential press corps, files this report.
South Korea has upgraded its bilateral partnership with the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, whilst jointly addressing common issues spanning North Korea's nuclear threat, building peace in Ukraine and new technologies. On Tuesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg adopted an individually tailored partnership program for South Korea and NATO, highlighting 11 areas of cooperation. These include 7 specific areas, including non-proliferation, counter-terrorism, cybersecurity and emerging technologies, with 4 areas of implementation, including working and high-level dialogue, capacity building and interoperability, and public diplomacy.
이번 나토 참석은 나토와 한국 간의 협력의 틀을 제도화하고 나토와 군사 정보와 사이버 분야의 협력에 관한 논의를 진행하기 위해서 이번에 왔습니다.
In particular, the President emphasized intel sharing and cyber cooperation, sharing his plans to establish an international cyber training center in Korea, which he hopes will work closely with NATO's Cyber Defense Cooperation Center.
This is because the battlefield is not limited to a specific territory and geographical scope, and many illegal acts and violence have been committed online, transcending time and space, and psychological cyber warfare has developed to sway public opinion. Thus, in all areas of security, from installing cutting-edge technologies to intelligence, strengthening intel and cyber cooperation is all the more vital.
Yoon also called for a firm global response to North Korea's growing nuclear and missile provocations, to which Stoltenberg voiced his support. The South Korean leader also reaffirmed Seoul's unwavering support for peace and reconstruction in Ukraine. He's expected to further highlight these issues Wednesday with his counterparts from other invited Asia-Pacific countries, Japan, Australia and New Zealand.
President Yoon is moderating a meeting of the so-called AP4 nations as they look to increase and deepen cooperation across the Indo-Pacific and Atlantic regions based on their growing areas of overlapping interests and challenges.
Following the meeting, the South Korean leader is set to speak at a NATO session extended to partner countries. The 31-member alliance on Tuesday called for the complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea in a joint communique condemning in the strongest terms North Korea's weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs. It also urged the Pyongyang regime to return to international agreements on nuclear non-proliferation as well as dialogue proposed by Seoul, Tokyo and Washington. 오수영, Arirang News, Vilnius.
And on the sidelines of the NATO summit, President Yoon-Kishida sat down separately with his counterparts in Europe and from the Asia-Pacific, seeking to expand Korea's diplomatic and economic reach into these regions. Our Lee Kyung-eun reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has sought to use the NATO summit in Vilnius as a path to expand South Korea's diplomacy in Europe through a series of meetings with the leaders of several NATO members and allies. Those include a meeting with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, where the leaders discussed cooperation on renewable energy, defense and research in the Arctic region. And in his meeting with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, a third time to do so, they discussed stabilizing the global semiconductor supply chain and cooperation on artificial intelligence. The digital sector also topped the agenda in Yoon's talks with Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa. While the meeting with New Zealand's Prime Minister focused on the mutual supply chain, discussions with Hungary's Prime Minister were on electric vehicles and the bio sector. Yoon discussed nuclear cooperation and the defense industry with Romania, and talks with Sweden's Prime Minister were on building key supply chains such as batteries and rare earths. While each meeting was focused on a particular area of interest with the respective nation, the South Korean leader had a broader aim to expand Seoul's partnership with Eastern Europe as a whole, which the presidential office deems critical to national security.
Until now, Yoon's summit-level diplomacy was focused on Western Europe and America. But this NATO trip serves as a chance for South Korea to expand global supply chain cooperation with Eastern Europe. The region could play a strategic role in complementing Western Europe on economic security, with its basic science capability and potential.
President Yoon also used each meeting as a platform to promote South Korea's bid to host the 2030 World Expo, as well as showing Seoul's solidarity in supporting Ukraine and calling for cooperation on North Korea. The president will continue meeting other leaders on Wednesday, including those from Japan, the UK, and Finland, which will bring his combined bilateral summits from his NATO trip to 13. Young-eun, Arirang News.
And as my colleague Kyung-eun just mentioned, President Yoon-Kishida is slated to sit down with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida on this Wednesday in Lithuania. A detailed agenda has reportedly not been set, but the two leaders are expected to address Japan's planned discharge of new Fukushima radioactive wastewater into the Pacific Ocean starting later this summer. Speaking to reporters in Vilnius, the host city of this year's NATO summit back on Tuesday, traveling presidential aides added the Yoon-Kishida summit may touch upon mutual concerns over exchange rate volatility and supply chain instability. Also in Lithuania, NATO says Ukraine will be invited to join the security alliance in the future when conditions are right. Now, these remarks have been rebuked by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
NATO leaders in the Lithuanian capital on Tuesday offered an invitation to Ukraine to join the military alliance, but remained vague on further details, including any time frame.
We reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. We also made clear that we will issue an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO when allies agree and conditions are met.
In the communiqué on Tuesday, NATO did recognize the need to move faster, but would not be drawn on a timeline for when Ukraine would be invited to the alliance, as the leaders struggle to agree on when Ukraine might join, as well as other conditions of its membership. NATO members did, however, acknowledge that Ukraine's military was increasingly interoperable and more politically integrated with NATO forces, adding it would continue to support Ukraine's push for democracy and security. NATO's lack of clarity over offering Ukraine membership into the military alliance led President Vladimir Zelensky to criticize the latest statement. Taken to Twitter on Tuesday, the Ukrainian leader said that while the country values its allies, Ukraine also deserves respect, adding that it's unprecedented and absurd when a time frame is not set neither for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership. Zelensky also slammed the delay, saying there seems to be no readiness to invite Ukraine, adding that a window of opportunity is being left to bargain Ukraine's membership in NATO in negotiations with Russia, meaning it will give Russia the motivation to continue its terror. 이승재, Arirang News.
In other news, an established group of Korean corporate heavyweights will join the presidential entourage in Poland this week to boost bilateral trade ties on several fronts, including defense. Our Yoon-Kishida has more.
With President Yoon Suk-yeol set to visit Poland in the coming days, business delegations from South Korea will be heading there too to discuss strengthening bilateral ties in energy, defense, and infrastructure. These delegations will include the chairman and chief executive of LG, Gu Kwang-mo, Hanwha Group's vice chairman Kim Dong-kwan, and chairman of LS Group, Gu Jae-eun. LG's affiliates, including LG Electronics and LG Energy Solution, currently run a total of 8 corporations in Poland with almost 9,000 employees. LG's production accounts for 1.8% of Poland's GDP of over $688 billion. In addition, LG Energy Solutions plant in the city of Wrocław is the biggest battery production site in Europe, and its production output surpassed 10 trillion won, or around $7.7 billion for the first time last year. LS Group, led by the chairman Gu Jae-eun, operates production plants for EV battery parts and fiber optical cable. The group's business in Poland continues to see growth, now standing at around $227 million in terms of monetary value. Its chairman visited LS Cable and System Poland Corporation in April to strengthen its position in the European EV ecosystem. Poland is also known for its defense sector. Hanwha Aerospace and the Polish government made a pact in August to export the K9 Thunder, a South Korean self-propelled howitzer, and signed an additional contract to export multiple rockets to Poland in November, bringing the total to over $6 billion. Hyundai Rotem, which is supplying K2 Black Panther tanks to Poland, is expecting a contract extension in the second half of this year following its visit to Poland. Construction companies are also anticipating expanded business opportunities, as some Korean companies have already won contracts to build the biggest petrochemical plant in Poland. And with Poland launching a nuclear project, MOUs between the two countries are expected in next-generation energy sectors such as small modular reactors, which Korean companies are highly recognized for. 이은진, Arirang News.
On the local front, Korea marked a further expansion in employment last month, and while the finding in itself is favorable, the concern is that the elderly continue to secure jobs while the youth do not. Accordingly, this reality has prompted a fresh pledge of action by authorities here to better address the trend and more. Our economics correspondent Lee Dae-yeon explains.
More than 28.8 million people were in jobs last month, up 333,000 from the same period last year. According to Statistics Korea, June marked the third consecutive month for on-year increases above 300,000. However, the latest figure was down slightly from May, some 351,000 more jobs compared to the same month the year before.
With increasing demand for daycare services and more outdoor activities resuming, a rise in the number of people in employment continues. But due to the sluggish construction market, the on-year increase dropped compared to May.
By age, the number of people over 60 in jobs is continuing to grow, with 343,000 more people in that age group employed. However, the figure for those aged 15 to 29 dropped by 117,000, decreasing for the 8th month in a row. One official from Statistics Korea says the continuous drop in employment figures for younger people is due to the overall population drop. It also said fewer jobs in the manufacturing sector and wholesale and retail businesses have also caused a decline in youth employment. In fact, the manufacturing sector continued with a 6th month of consecutive jobs decline, with 10,000 fewer jobs on year recorded last month. The number of people employed in the construction sector dropped 62,000, the biggest drop among all sectors. The medical and social welfare service sector rose 126,000. Meanwhile, earlier on Wednesday, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho said in an emergency economic meeting that the government will focus on resolving job mismatch issues by improving the working environment and utilizing foreign workers in Korea.
Following the measures to resolve labor shortage issues in 6 sectors, including manufacturing and logistics in March, the government will roll out the same measures in 4 sectors, such as shipping and construction.
He also said government support for small-sized companies with policies that support working parents will be expanded, while the visa quota for skilled foreign workers will be increased. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
There has been a net outflow of foreign investment from the local bourse for the first time in 3 months in June. According to the Bank of Korea on this Wednesday, foreign investors sold some $310 million worth of stocks last month. Now, that's a turnaround from the net inflow in April and May. There was nonetheless a net inflow of around $3.2 billion in local bonds for the 4th month in a row. But investment in local securities was down on figures in May. On the weather front, the torrential downpour on Tuesday claimed at least 1 life, and while Seoul is seeing a lull in rainfall today, wet conditions look to persist throughout the week. Our Lee Soo-jin has the latest.
1 person has died after heavy downpours swept across South Korea on Tuesday. In Yeoju, Gyeonggi-do province, about 60 kilometers from Seoul, a man in his 70s who was walking along a river was killed after being swept away. Police and firefighters launched a search after his daughter reported that he had gone out to exercise and not returned. His body was found in the bushes near a river after a 3-hour search. At the time, Yeoju was seeing up to 60 millimeters of rain per hour. In Busan, 2 women in their 60s were stranded at around 3:40 p.m. as the water level of a local river rose during the heavy downpour. Although one was rescued, the other is still missing, and the police are still searching for her. Seoul also had heavy downpours on Tuesday, with Dongjakgu district getting more than 100 millimeters of rain in a single day. Emergency alerts were issued to several areas in Seoul, including the districts of Dongjakgu, Gurugu, and Yeongdeung-pogu. The Korea Meteorological Administration implemented a new measure on June 15th to directly send emergency alerts to regions experiencing intense downpours, which are classified as more than 50 millimeters of rain in 1 hour and 90 millimeters of rain in 3 hours. The heavy rain also disrupted the operation of subways in Seoul. Subways in the metropolitan region have to halt services when there is more than 65 millimeters of rain per hour. Trains on Line 1 were temporarily halted but resumed within 10 minutes. Trains on Line 4 were suspended for 2 hours. As of 11:30 p.m. on Tuesday, heavy rain warnings for Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province were all lifted. The KMA forecast today to be mostly cloudy with a lull in the rain in the Seoul metropolitan region. Southern parts of the nation, however, are expected to see heavy rainfall of 30 to 60 millimeters per hour, accompanied by strong winds, thunder, and lightning in the afternoon. According to the Gyeongsangnam-do Fire Department, there has been a total of 15 cases of heavy rain-related damage, such as damaged roads and flooded homes, reported between 1 p.m. Tuesday and 9 a.m. Wednesday. Heavy rain across the nation is also being forecast until this weekend. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the U.S. state of Vermont, 1 person has died in major floods. More than 100 people had to be rescued. The state and other parts of the Northeast were hit by a massive storm over the weekend that dumped up to 2 months of rain in just 2 days. The floods washed out roads, damaged houses, and caused billions of dollars of damage. Flood watches were issued to millions of people in the region, but these were lifted on Tuesday evening. Still, local authorities remain on alert as dams are near capacity in Vermont and many rivers remain swollen. The state is forecast to see more rain on Thursday and Friday. We move over to Thailand now, where Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha is set to retire from politics. The announcement was made Tuesday, 2 days before the country's parliament was scheduled to vote for a new prime minister. A general election in May saw opposition parties win overwhelmingly in what was widely seen as a rejection of military-backed rule. The outgoing PM was not expected to gain enough support in the lower house to win another term. His government has been criticized for repression of civil rights and freedoms and for its handling of the coronavirus pandemic and the economy. The retired general began his rule over the country in 2014 after seizing power in a military coup. He was later formally elected in 2019. He will remain as prime minister until a new government is formed. Two siblings have become the youngest ever winners of the prestigious Sagrav Trophy after both set records for flying solo around the world. The dual British and Belgian citizens, Zara and Mac Rutherford, aged 18 and 21, picked up the award on Tuesday. Mac became the youngest person to fly unaccompanied around the world in 2022 at the age of 17. And 8 months earlier, Zara became the youngest female pilot to accomplish the feat, aged 19. The trophy goes all the way back to 1930 and is awarded by the Royal Automobile Club to those who demonstrate skill and courage in transportation on land, water, or in the air. Previous winners include Lewis Hamilton and Richard Branson. And finally, a volcano near Iceland's capital of Reykjavik has erupted. Called a minor eruption by the country's meteorological office, it erupted Monday after weeks of minor earthquakes in the region. The eruption on the Litli Hurtur mountain is located in an uninhabited area known for its volcanoes, eruptions, and lava flows. It has so far emitted no ash and caused no disruptions to the capital's nearby international airport. Authorities have, however, warned that there could be an accumulation of dangerously high levels of volcanic gases, which could affect the capital if carried by winds. A major volcanic eruption in Iceland in 2010 grounded tens of thousands of flights in Europe due to ash plumes. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Hope those in central regions stay safe during Tuesday's downpours. Today, it's southern regions that are seeing heavy rain from early dawn. Rain is coming down hard with heavy rain alerts in place in South Coast regions. And until this afternoon, the South will see 30 to 60 millimeters an hour of heavy rain. And until tonight, 전라남도 and 경상남도 provinces could see more than 100 millimeters of downpours along with strong gusts of wind. The landslide crisis alert is at its second highest level in Korea, except for on Jeju, where a heat wave warning has been issued for parts of the island. Brace for strong heat day and night. The capital region will be free from rain today under partly sunny skies, with highs going up 5 degrees higher to 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Then tomorrow, wet and stormy conditions make a return to central areas and stay wild through Friday, but rain will linger through the weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of the Daily Report. Do stay tuned for our panel session coming up right after this break. Thank you for now.
Mabuhay. I am the ambassador of the Philippines to the Republic of Korea, Teresa Dizon de Vega. As Korea moves into a more active and engaged position as a global pivotal state, and with the growing influence of Korea in many fields, not just the economy, but also in innovation, in digitalization, in saving the environment, and of course in creative content. Arirang TV has been a very important platform for bringing news and information about Korea to the rest of the world, and also as a platform for talking about and discussing and engaging with other countries and talking about Korea's bilateral relations with the Philippines and with the greater global community. As we move towards a new era after the pandemic, we look forward to more active engagement, to more information, to more opportunities for discussion as Korea, the Philippines, and the rest of the world build a better and safer normal. Resonating with the world, Arirang.
Arirang TV is conducting a quality and satisfaction evaluation to enhance the broadcast service for viewers worldwide. Please visit our website www.arirang.com to provide your honest opinions. Participants will be entered into a draw for a chance to win prizes. 2023 Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
President Yoon-Kishida is in Lithuania for the annual NATO gathering amid concerns of a broader regional security, while Korea itself played host to delegates from Africa to launch a joint project aimed at addressing the continent's food security. So what is the significance of Seoul's engagement with the world's largest security alliance? And how does the so-called K-Rice Belt project seek to support food security in Africa? Also, is Korea punching below its weight in terms of broader global welfare? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It's that time of the week yet again during which we touch upon Korea-related news that made global headlines as well. For more on this, I have Jack Barton here in the studio. Jack, it's been a while. Welcome back.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I also have Thomas Maresca with us. Thomas, it's good to have you back.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Right, so Jack, President Yoon-Kishida is making his second consecutive appearance at the annual NATO summit being held in Lithuania this week. What do you suppose is the broader significance of Korea's continuous engagement with NATO?
Well, it's definitely significant. We see this relationship continue to grow under the Yoon presidency. He's made a real push to strengthen ties with the United States, but also NATO, and we've seen an outcome from the meeting already, a strengthening of the partnership in 11 different areas, perhaps most significantly in cybersecurity, cyber warfare, sort of sharing information when it comes to high-tech wares and whatnot. And clearly from South Korea's perspective, the emphasis is on North Korea and bringing NATO deeper into the fold when it comes to dealing with the issue of North Korea's nuclear program. But from NATO's perspective, it's about bringing South Korea deeper into the fold when it comes to Ukraine and doing more about Ukraine. So there is a little bit of a tight walk. We did see that strong statement from NATO again, calling the DPRK's nuclear weapons program unacceptable. But I think that pushes on, you know, for South Korea to do more, to send weapons to Ukraine, something it hasn't directly been doing so far. But it has sent parts and it has sent sort of weapons to other countries like artillery to the United States, which then sends it to Ukraine. So South Korea really doing a bit of a delicate dance, I think. Not trying to please everyone, but you know, getting closer with NATO, getting closer with the United States, and at the same time keeping a relationship with Russia. Remember, it still imports oil and petrol, less of it, but you know, it doesn't go along with the sanction. It actually imports more coal now from Russia than at the beginning of the war. So this delicate dance, but as a part of that, this is real. You know, that strengthening of the relationship with NATO, it's real, and there are tangible results coming from it.
Right. And Thomas, prior to his departure, President Yoon-Kishida called for a greater commitment against North Korea's hostile weapons ambitions. Do you suppose Pyongyang's persistent provocations, Thomas, has perhaps provided South Korea with a greater platform to better engage with its global partners, given the shared concern over security?
Absolutely. I mean, as we saw today, North Korea sent a message of its own right on the, you know, perhaps timed a bit to the NATO meeting. But yeah, I think clearly there's a very tangible case to be made. You know, not just North Korea, the number of provocations from North Korea, but the actual quality of them. I think it's clearer and clearer to the rest of the world the actual threat that North Korea is posing, and the, you know, sophistication of the types of weapon systems that it's you know, showing the world. So I think, you know, the threat is more real, and you can certainly make that case from you know, Yoon's perspective that NATO and the allies should be on board with a security partnership. And I think, you know, to touch on the Ukraine issue that is sort of you know, hovering above this whole meeting, Ukraine in a way is an object lesson in what happens, you know, how a regional conflict, you know, can spill over into the rest of the globe. And I think Yoon can clearly point to that and say, you know, what happens here, we can already see the you know, the spillover effects all over the world. And so some of the things Jack mentioned, you know, even in issues of cybersecurity, I mean, supply chains, those sorts of things. So I think, you know, it's a talking point or an agenda point for the Yoon administration to, you know, forward their goals, but it's not something that's kind of being made up out of thin air. And I think, you know, the rest of the world, I mean, sometimes North Korea does still seem a bit of a remote, issue, but I think, more and more we're seeing just the interconnectivity of, its role in the geopolitical stage.
Right. And before we continue talking about North Korea, Jack, Ukraine, as you and both Thomas mentioned, it has been dominating talks at NATO this year as well. Now, President Yoon has pledged tangible post-war reconstruction efforts with regard to Ukraine. Do you believe Korea has much to offer in terms of post-war reconstruction?
Yeah, I think Korea has a lot to offer. Obviously, European countries will take the lead, given that Ukraine is in their neighborhood, but I think South Korea can still play a very strong role. Has the unique experience, as do some European countries, of basically being rubble at the end of a war and then building up a very strong economy and a public housing sector from a state-led perspective after that war. So South Korea has a lot of experience in that and of doing it really well, of smart cities. They're also talking about IT traffic control. They're talking about the industrial complex. There's a plan already being drawn up, a memorandums of understanding for South Korea to help rebuild the energy sector. There's conventional energy within there. There's even plans for hydrogen. There's plans for 2 nuclear power plants. All of this is sort of billions of dollars. But it's all a matter really of when. When could this possibly happen? For instance, there's one agreement with Poland to help rebuild Mariupol. Well, that's still firmly in Russian hands. And the counteroffensive, as much as, a lot of people hype it up a little bit, it's not going that well. And Mariupol is still firmly in Russian hands, as are a lot of the areas where there are plans for the redevelopment. So this war could take years. And a lot of that redevelopment and reconstruction may be years away in the implementing. But certainly, if the will is still there from South Korea, I think South Korea, the experience that South Korea can bring to the table, would be critical.
Right. And talking about South Korea bringing things to the table, Thomas, this week here in Seoul, there were efforts to help Africa secure food. And Korea recently sealed a very comprehensive deal with, I believe, 8 countries in Africa as part of efforts to bolster their food security. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. So Monday, Seoul signed a memorandum of understanding with 8 African countries, the K Rice Belt project. It's not quite as catchy as K-pop or K-drama, but it's a branding thing, I guess. But basically, the agreement says Korea will deliver high-yield rice varieties to these different African countries, kind of tailored to the environment of each one, machinery, tech experience, and the 8 countries you mentioned. It's Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Cameroon, Uganda, Ghana, Kenya, and Guinea-Bissau. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, the plan is to grow around 2,000 tons of rice in Africa this year. That will go up to 10,000 tons by 2027, which they say is enough to feed 30 million people a year there. Generally speaking, it falls into this, the Yoon administration has made a point of this, of kind of saying that South Korea wants to step up and take a more active role worldwide. I mean, some of what Jack mentioned too about Korea having this experience to draw on. I mean, South Korea is a country, I think the only country still that went from an aid recipient to an aid donor. So there is an interesting space for Korea to bring, its own lessons from, developing its economy from a really, poor position to, where it is now. And that, that makes a sort of a logical sense. Just as a kind of a global issue, I mean, food security certainly emerged as a major issue in the last few years with supply chain disruptions. I mean, certainly Africa, I think they only grow about 60% themselves, within the continent of the demand there. So there is a need for greater, food capacity on its own. And, so it fits into this sort of sphere of Korea also trying to have an influence on various sectors. I think generally Korea announced earlier this year they're going to double their agricultural ODA, or Overseas Development Aid budget by 2027. So that's been kind of in the works and working at different parts of the world with sort of tailored solutions. I mean, Korea is going to bring some tech solutions, I think some like smart farming types of initiatives to Asia. So there's a variety of planes on which South Korea can try to
right,
have
indeed.
an impact. Yeah.
And against this backdrop, Jack, there are some who claim that Korea has been punching below its weight in terms of better or broader global welfare. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know about that. You know, Korea's a two-track economy, has very advanced export sector, but also still, in many ways, at the domestic element, is still a developing economy. And it has been deeply involved with aid projects over the years, often under the radar. It has its own economic cooperation and development fund here. You know, and over the past decade or so, it spent billions of dollars, I think, on around 500 projects in 50 different countries around the world. It just often doesn't make a big hoopla about it. But South Korea is already contributing a lot, and as Thomas said, there are plans to really upscale that. And I think this kind of assistance, such as the project in Africa, this is money well spent, where you're not providing food, you're setting up the infrastructure for agriculture in the country. But sometimes it needs to be a little bit more holistic. So there's not much point setting up a great agriculture sector if you're not fixing the infrastructure to go with it. Because if you can't get that product to market on dirt roads or bad, you know, often this is a situation. So you need to take a broader look. And if the agriculture sector is normally bad, so too is the infrastructure. But I think this is a great start. It's I think an intelligent way to go about it, and if South Korea keeps building on this approach, you're going to get way more bang for your buck than if you're just sort of, handing out assistance, which is still badly needed in many places. Right. But yeah, I see this as a positive trend and going in the right direction.
I believe the wisdom of the words is that you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Exactly. Right, Thomas, back in Europe, now President Yoon is poised to fly into Poland this week as well. Some scholars say that Korea should seek to strengthen its relationship with middle powers. And that being said, what are your thoughts on the potential influence of middle powers amid this current climate of geopolitical tensions?
Yeah, well, you know, from Korea's perspective, I mean, it does make a lot of sense. It follows a little bit on what we've been talking about. But, you know, I mean, first of all, Korea, Yoon going to Poland, I mean, Poland has become a great partner for some, you know, of these segments of the economy that Korea is really trying to develop. I mean, it's a big weapons purchaser, and, you know, some nuclear power projects are in the works. So, you know, we're seeing how, you know, this is fitting into the, the Korean economy's development. And yeah, I think as far as middle powers, you know, Korea has a lot to offer on its own to trading partners around the world. I mean, from just technology to this defense sector to cultural and business opportunities. And, you know, I think within this, it's still, you know, this bipolar superpower great conflict of the US and China. And so for countries to be able to maneuver, and Korea's, I think, well positioned to be able to kind of maneuver in between that space and not be too, I mean, clearly Korea is aligned more strongly with the US, but it's not seen as, you know, a vassal state of the US, and can sort of present an independent way for other countries to sort of try to navigate this, overarching conflict between these two powers. And Korea offers a lot in terms of just being a good partner to work with. You know, it's a democratic country. It's not, hegemonic in any way. And, you know, even, you know, for countries that are choosing who to do business with, I mean, China offers a lot, but also carries with it a lot of, problems or issues. And the U.S. as well. I mean, I was thinking of, when French President Macron was in Beijing a few months ago, and he made this point of sort of saying, oh, you know, Europe is not a vassal state of the U.S. And that, you know, that does play, I think, domestically in a lot of countries. Like, a lot of countries don't want to be seen as just marching in step with the U.S. So I think Korea can operate in that space. Korea and other middle powers can really try to find some room to operate within that space. And, you know, perhaps as the world is also bifurcating into this kind of authoritarian regimes versus democratic regimes, I mean, those teams are kind of filling out, and Korea can sort of operate within that, kind of democratic, liberal world order, but not only as a, sort of puppet of the U.S. to say.
Right. Meanwhile, Jack, on the domestic front, back on Monday, I believe, South Korea celebrated its 24th anniversary of the opening of a center here in the country to help North Korean defectors better settle into South Korea. It's called the Hanawon. Have you heard of it, Jack?
I've heard of it. I've never been down there, but I've seen the photos.
Right, you have.
But, yeah.
What are your thoughts, generally speaking, about the efforts of Hanawon?
It's, of course, looking at it and looking at the photos, and when you think about it, there's something slightly Orwellian about the whole process, but how could you do it any other way? If I think back to Germany, when Germany was divided, well, the economy in North Korea is 18 times poorer than East Germany at the time, and yet here we are more than 30 years later. After unity, the Germans just still completely different people. They look at each other, East and West, and it's almost... So you have this huge cultural divide, this massive amount of culture shock when people turn up from North Korea in South Korea, and there needs to be this decompression chamber or this cushion, this retraining center. Is it ideal? I don't know. I couldn't be the judge of that, but it's definitely necessary. I would say it's probably necessary as well to have more follow-up. I know volunteers play a big, strong role when the North Koreans leave there. But that probably 3 months is not enough, given the huge shock they would have. And we know there's a lot of issues. Many want to go back because it's just too much. It's overwhelming. We know the suicide rate is much higher amongst North Korean defectors than the normal, South Korean public. And yeah, so I think this work is critical. Perhaps there needs to be more of it. But it also needs to be coupled, I think, with a change of perception in South Korea, and maybe a little bit more of an embrace of North Korean defectors. I don't think it's any secret that they sort of get treated like second-class citizens and face a lot of discrimination. So for all the talk of wanting reunification, it'd be nice if that could translate perhaps into a more welcoming atmosphere for people that actually go through hell and back to get out of North Korea and into South Korea.
Right, well, the Unification Ministry here actually did speak about trying to foster a social environment that is more understanding about the hardships of the North Korean defectors here in the country. Also on the peninsula, Thomas, North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, earlier this week, she spoke about American forces violating the airspace of North Korea, especially above its exclusive economic zone, that is. And pundits earlier talked about how this may be a setup, a pretext to paving the path to more provocations. We saw one earlier on this Wednesday morning. What are your thoughts? Are we looking at more later this month, especially in line with the so-called Victory Day?
I mean, that's certainly a target on the calendar that I think, analysts and observers are looking at. But, it's really hard, I think, to draw a straight line ever between what North Korea is saying and what they do or when exactly they do it. So, but clearly, I mean, the statements of Kim Yo-jong are of a part with this entire narrative that North Korea has long been espousing, but has really been pushing alongside all of its weapons tests of recent months and years, which is, the threat that is being posed by the U.S. and South Korea. So everything that North Korea is doing, they are framing as a response to, the threats from U.S. and South Korean joint military exercises. I mean, along with Kim Yo-jong's statement, the Defense Ministry also had issued a statement around that same day or on Monday that was talking about the spy plane missions, but also made a big point about the U.S. nuclear ballistic missile submarine that is supposed to come to South Korea at some undetermined point. But, framing that as this nuclear provocation that the U.S. was doing. So, I mean, it's clearly that's the whole sort of message that North Korea is sending to the world, probably to some extent domestically. And, interestingly, though, I mean, in recent months, we've seen China and Russia kind of echo this framing in the UN Security Council resolutions. Russia and China have just sort of blocked those from anything happening around North Korea. And the rationale they've always given is kind of in line with what North Korea has said, that Russia and China are half blaming it on the provocations of the U.S. being here and conducting military exercises. And it's a little bit like the way Ukraine says it had to invade Russia because NATO was coming and pushing at our borders. So It's like a rhetorical framework for what they're doing. And I think clearly whether or not anyone buys it or thinks it's justified, I mean, that in itself is clearly a message of the direction that they're heading and their intentions. I think.
Right. Jack, moving forward, back here on the Korean, in South Korea that is, it has been reported that child care centers here in the country, Jack, are being replaced by homes for the elderly. What do you propose? I understand this is a tough question, but what do you propose to perhaps better deal with the shrinking and aging population here in the country?
Yeah, this is a big problem here. It's not a little one. It's, I think, from 2017 down from 40,000 to 31,000, and elderly care jumping from 76 to 90,000. And it's not just here, of course, Japan, China, even Russia and Ukraine. People are wondering what will the impact of the death of hundreds of thousands of young men in these countries suffering the same problem. Here in Korea, President Yoon's pointed out that 200 billion has been spent over the last 16 years trying to solve this problem. I think the reality is you have very high housing costs. You have huge pressure of education. If you have children, it's incredibly expensive with the tutoring. The work hours here are very long. I mean, basically everything is set up to make it, even if you really want to have children, it's a big question mark. You have to say, can we do this? And the problem is, the answer is to alleviate all of that, but it comes at a time when there is economic problems, when even though the real estate market has dipped, prices still remain higher than before they dipped. The cost of education continues to soar. So all of the elements that have created the problem are either intensifying or staying the same. So, unfortunately, I don't really see a big cure for this. Society is just going to have to adapt. And Japan, which started doing this a little bit earlier, I've been there and interviewed people in their 80s working at McDonald's, because they say, well, we'd rather do this and be retired, and society is going to have to change. Maybe there'll be a miracle, maybe something's going to change, but no, I don't see a miracle cure in the next decade or so.
Right. So for the time being, we just need to adapt to the situation, make the best out of it then.
Yeah.
All right, Jack, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Thomas, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Issues and Insiders. Do join us again same time tomorrow, that is Thursday.